I'm going to talk about the effect of one thing today out of Romans chapter 5. And I happened upon a little poem here that brings some of that out. The title of the poem is, All It Takes Is One. One simple sneeze and a cold is spread. One small rumor and a scandal is spread. One tricky bounce and the World Series is over. One quick glance and the honeymoon is over. One tough question and your mind gets scattered. One false move and your brains get scattered. One errant paperclip and a factory is shut down. One broken pressure cap, valve, oil, control, spring, cam, seal, and a city is shut down. One big sale and your trip to Hawaii is earned. One little sin and your trip to heaven isn't. Think about this, especially that last line. One little sin and your trip to heaven isn't. And that's what the Apostle Paul is talking about here in Romans chapter 5, beginning at verse 12 through the end of the chapters. He talks about Adam having what appeared to be probably at the time one little sin, and yet the whole world shut down as a result of that. So we're going to talk about the germ of the disease of sin that affects us as human beings, and also the remedy. So the title of the message is One Man, One Sin, One Big Mess. And we could go further and bring in the contribution of the second man in the passage, who happens to be the Lord Jesus Christ. So we want to start with verses 12 through 14 of Romans chapter 5. Let me read those from the New International Version. He says, Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all men, because all sinned. For before the law was given, sin was in the world, but sin is not taken into account when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, who was a pattern of the one to come. In those verses, we see the germ of the problem, and that we have one man's sin that ruined the whole of humanity. And I don't know about you, but Marcia and I came out from getting my hair cut on Friday in Davenport, and we came out in the street, and by the way, this is a Julie special again, so she's doing a fine job, I think, with my good looks. And I'm hoping, you might pray about this, I'm hoping that the more I let her cut my hair, the more interested she might be in coming to church. You know, that's part of the reason that we're not tripping into Spokane and stuff like that. We're staying local so that, because she lives with her husband in Seven Bays, and so we want her and him to be with us, and if it means her cutting my hair every 6 weeks or whatever, to do that, that's what we're after. But anyway, we came out of the place, and we were accosted on the street by someone that we knew and presented himself as our friend, and I thought was asking honest questions about our attitude about the virus. And all of a sudden the conversation turned, and after several F words and GDs and such, we decided that maybe we shouldn't be engaged in that conversation anymore. Unfortunately, I have to confess that although I didn't use any really bad words, I felt like in order to get him off my back, I had to sort of use some words that he would understand. And so I grieved about that all Friday night, all yesterday, and even this morning I wasn't feeling very good about that, because I don't know how pastoral he perceived me as being, and this is especially after my big swan song write-up, it came out in the paper this week, that so I only tell you that to warn you that even in our small communities, People are taking this COVID-19 and using it to destroy relationships. And I just want to say up front, I don't care if you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. I don't think God cares either, as far as the collective thing. You have the freedom in the New Testament, and we're going to get to this, someday, unless the Lord comes back first. In Romans chapters 14 and 15, I regard the vaccine as your Christian liberty. If you want to take it, that's your prerogative. If you don't want to take it, that's your prerogative under Christian liberty. Two Christians can disagree on something and both be right and acceptable before God. That's what Romans 14 and 15 teach. So there shouldn't be any judging of each other. In fact, Romans 14 and 15 say, don't judge each other on the choices that you make as long as they're within the express commands of Scripture. This church is welcome to anybody. We're not going to stand at the door. We haven't yet. We're not going to do it now and have you present proof of vaccination. Or on the other hand, if you prove you've been vaccinated, then you're out of here. We're not going to do that either. We're not going to require you to wear a mask. That you are adults and you do what you want to as unto the Lord. And I don't take this thing unseriously. I know that it exists. I know people are getting sick. We've gotten sick. There's a few others of us that got sick. I thought that as long as we were in the house of the Lord, very similar to what the Jews felt when the Babylonians were coming down on them in the Old Testament. If they ran into the temple, they'd be safe. And what happened? The Babylonians, attacked them, burned the temple, carried them off to captivity. I had that feeling that as long as we're in here, we're protected. Well, the Lord said, no, I've got other things to acquaint you with. And part of it is getting all depressed because the incredible shrinking man didn't ever come back and grow up again. That's a sort of if you're new to the church, you won't understand that joke, but you can ask over coffee fellowship here, what in the world was he talking about with that? And I'd be happy to bore you and tell you, but I'm not supposed to be boring today, so I'll be boring tomorrow, but not today. At any rate, I just wanted to say that because Christians are dividing on this thing. They are judging each other. They are throwing away their family relationships, within the Christian family, the spiritual relationships, at a point when we need to be together and we need to not just play church anymore, but to be together to make an impact on people that don't know sick them from straight up spiritually. And I believe that's part of the Satan's plan to close us down. So we couldn't be together, we couldn't strategize for ministry and outreach and how to get people acquainted with the claims of God on their lives, which is their only hope. What Jesus did is their only hope, and we've seen that already through these first 5 chapters of the book of Romans. But don't allow someone to, and be careful because in this case, Marcia's been confronted, 3 times now. She couldn't go to Safeway without being confronted by somebody. We couldn't get our hair cut without being confronted by somebody, and you couldn't even go into Subway that one time without being confronted by someone who says we're very unloving because we are infecting everybody, because at this point we've chosen not to do the vaccine, not because of a lot of the reasons why everybody else does. I'll tell you my reason. It's because the medical community doesn't line up. And when the government takes it over, well, I don't trust, I'll just be blunt, I don't trust any of our politicians. I don't care what party stripe they are wearing. I don't trust any of them. So there you go. Does that biblical revelation? Well, that's just my perception. Uh-oh, I offended Mike. That's the risk you take when you talk sort of bluntly. But, this guy presented himself as our friend, and then he blamed us for 2 people dying in the Davenport community by inference because we have chosen not to get the vaccine. And then he finished his conversation by saying, well, I hope that when you change your mind after they cart you off to Colorado, which I guess is where the concentration camp is going to be, that when you want the vaccine, that it's not available for you, and I hope you die. That's basically what he said. And I'm thinking, huh? I wanted to say, I was thinking lots of things. Yeah, he put up his dukes. I thought I was going to have a... Go ahead. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. And I thought they had first priority, in this. So anyway, I only, obviously you can tell by the voice tones in my face and everything, which, that, and this was pretty recent, so it's on my heart. But I also want to tell you that Pastor Steve told his church last Sunday morning in the announcements, which implies, the words that he uses implies that there's been some disunity at Trinity over pro and con vaccine. I don't want that to happen here. I want you to read Romans 14 and 15, and you decide as under the Lord what you should do. And I will support any decision that you make. You pray about your decisions and stuff, I support that. And I don't want to hear of anybody judging anybody else because they either got vaccinated or they didn't get vaccinated. Because I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. To put our Christian brotherhood and sisterhood and unity and make it dependent on that stuff, which by comparison is trivial. Now, we know people that have, gotten into serious trouble with COVID. So I don't think the thing is a hoax by any means. But I do think that the Christian response to it needs to be godly. And it needs to be loving. And sometimes the most loving things you do, like in our case, we agonize. You talk to Rick, you talk to Dennis, you talk to Steve. We, as elders, we agonized over what we should do back in March of 2020. And then in May of 2020 when we did decide to reopen. That was not an easy decision to make. We did the right thing, I think, early on to close the church while we waited for the 15 days to slow the curve and then the next 15 days to slow the curve. But when we lost Easter and when we lost Mother's Day and we lost fellowship with each other, and you guys had to listen to me on Facebook, man, that was the worst thing, I think, of the whole deal. And then we found out there was a conspiracy going up here that people were coming into the church and watching me on this screen and denying us from coming personally. And I thought, come on. And then somebody else called me up and said, well, Pastor, we're going to meet, and you're welcome to join us if you want to. I thought, well, that's, thanks for the invitation. So we decided that maybe we better come back regardless. But anyway, that was not an easy decision of what to do. And, do we hand out masks at the door and isolate you? Or you, at that time it was before the vaccine, so it would have been social distancing and masks. So all you masked people can sit over here and all you non-masked people can sit over here. And we thought, why would we do that? Why would we do that? And you're not children, you're adults. You all have your equal rights before the Lord of what to do. And I do believe the Lord protected us, for the most part. And the ones of us who did get sick, I don't know if the germ was here in the building lurking, and swooping down on us. Oh, there's fresh meat, I don't know. And it's interesting how, there were only a few of us. The whole rest of the pack didn't get sick, from that. But we worried about, oh no, we're going to be a super spreader and, blah, 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 blah. And we wanted our testimony to the community to be right. We wanted to obey our governing authorities. That's Romans chapter 13 and 1 Peter chapter 2 and 3, I think it is. But there was a certain point where it became obvious to us as the elders that there was a satanic-based conspiracy to get the church out of action. And we thought, we can't participate in that. So it came back to the point of we must obey God rather than men. And then we reopened, and it's very interesting what happened. The Lord caused growth in the church simply because we were open and other churches were still closed. We had a family that traveled quite a few miles to get here because we were the only church in the area that they knew Bible teaching was reliable in, and the worship was good and such. And I don't regret that decision. And a year later, a few of us got sick, but we all lived. We all came out of it. And praise to the Lord, for that. So anyway, I didn't mean to take half the sermon time talking about that, but it's sort of stuck in my craw. And if it's happening to us in the little small town of Davenport, I don't know how many of you have had a similar encounter with somebody so far. Just be prepared for it if you haven't. It's either, people are buying into this, what they hear on the national media, that we are bad people if we, do this or don't do that. And we're gonna get you for that. So you guys just be true to the Lord. What the Lord wants you to do, you do it. You have the perfect liberty, not only on COVID, but a lot of other stuff. If you want to watch things on TV, we're not even going to judge you if you watch CNN or Fox. Okay, I went too far there. I get most of my news from the internet now. Oh, that should have thrown a caution at you when I said that. All right, so let's get back to the Bible here. So one man's sin ruined the whole of humanity. So he talks about the invasion of our two arch enemies, and those are sin and death. Martin Lloyd-Jones is a great British preacher of yesteryear. He wrote, "Mankind at large seems to prefer doing wrong than right." Have you noticed that? And that if you tell a child not to do something, he will want to do it immediately. Have you ever noticed that? And will, as often as not, proceed to do it. And then Lewis Sperry Chafer, the founder of Dallas Theological Seminary, he wrote in his theology, "No child has to be taught to sin, but every child must be encouraged to do good." Isn't that true? Yeah. So I have a whole digression here on the origin of sin. How did sin begin? I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to read that because I used that time in my rant. But sin invaded. Sin entered the world. And the word for entered there in verse 12 is the word that could be translated invaded. And that's what sin did at the beginning. It invaded. It's still mounting an invasion. And then sin brings death. Just as sin entered the world through one man, that's Adam, and death through sin. And in this way, death came to all men because all sinned. As we'll see again in Romans 6, the wages of sin is death. The reason or the way that you and I know that something is wrong with humanity is because we die. Sin leads to death. And back in Genesis 2, you eat of the tree, God told Adam, and you shall what? Die. And it's even more sophisticated than that, because the actual Hebrew says, dying you shall die. Because how many years later did Adam actually die? Physically. A lot of years. But the Lord told him, the day in which you eat it, of that tree, you shall die. What was he referring to? Spiritual death, separation. That's what death is separation. When you die physically, the inner man is separated from the outer man, the body. That we die reveals that spiritual death, which is separation from God, exists. And if spiritual death isn't neutralized by justification by faith, then eternal death occurs, and that's eternal separation from God. There's a reason that we shrink from death. Nobody likes death. Nobody wants to die. Anybody? Well, there might be a couple of exceptions to that. Rick and I were talking earlier about if you think the vaccine is going to eventually kill you, if you knowingly think that's the case, then and you want to be with the Lord, then you go get the jab, and then you die and you're absent from the body, present with the Lord. And the question is that suicide? It's a theological question of the morning here. Is that suicide? If you know this will lead to that, and I'm not saying that it is or will, because I'm going to play it right down the middle here on that. But if you know that if your intent is to die, so you go get the vaccine so that you'll die so you can be with the Lord, is that suicide? That's something else you can talk with me about, along with the incredible shrinking man, over coffee and cookies. But we shrink from death because death is unnatural. It's a horror. We have this, prevailing view in society that death is just the natural thing, of life, but it isn't. It's an enemy. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. We have the resurrection of Jesus Christ to deliver us from physical death, ultimately, the lasting effects. In other words, we die physically unless we're raptured, but that's not all she wrote. That we'll be resurrected and our physical bodies will be infused with new life from the Lord. And then it says death spread to all men, and that could be understood as, with the language, to pass on as an inheritance through the generations. So we inherited death because of one sin. One sin. One man, one sin, and one big mess. And then it says, all sinned in Adam. The way God looks at things is that he looked at Adam, and Adam was our representative. So when he chose against God, we all chose against God in God's estimation. And so we are placed in under sin as human beings, and we're dead in sin. And the passage that Steve shared with us from Ephesians chapter 2, we were dead in trespasses and sin. We had no ability to do any spiritual good in God's sight. And there's at least three aspects of sin. There's the personal sins that we confess when we take communion. We confess those sins, 1 John 1:9. God's solution to personal sins is forgiveness. There's the sin nature, the capacity within that sin, the acts of sin come from the sin nature inside. That's inherited corruption. And then there's imputed sin. We talked about that, or we're talking about it right now in Romans 5. The sin that God takes and places into our account from Adam. We're counted guilty because of Adam's sin. That's inherited guilt. That's what we inherited from the first man. What's the solution to that? The substitutionary death of Christ. And when he paid the penalty and won the battle on the cross, he stood in our place, and his righteousness now has been placed into our account. And then we're judged as under sin in Romans 3:9. That's what's the solution to that? God declares us righteous because of what Christ did for us. So sin invaded the world by means of one man. In Adam all sin, and in Adam all die. God regarded the entire race as having sinned when Adam sinned. And then death reigned from the time of Adam. That's verse 14. Even without the express commands that God gave Adam and later gave Moses, death was present and was the proof that something had gone wrong with the human race. In between Adam, don't eat of the tree, and Moses, 10 Commandments and so forth, there was no express command of God. That's why he says that the trespass is, let's see how he put it here. Nevertheless, death, this is verse 14, reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam. So he didn't put it all on us during that time because there was no express revelation of God of what was sin and what wasn't. So death came on everybody because of Adam's sin rather than their own personal acts of sin.